Hi everyone, I am Nidhi Manchanda, a certified financial planner and head of training and development at Fintoo. I welcome you all to the very first episode of WOW series, that is Wednesday on Wealth. In this series, every Wednesday we'll come up with a new video on wealth products. So I'm sure this series will definitely help you to choose the right financial investment products for yourself. Today, in the first episode of WOW series, we will discuss about 3 top mutual fund SIPs where you should invest for your long-term goals. Before I dive in directly to which SIPs I am recommending today, I would like to share that one should always invest as per their own risk profile. And if you are not aware of your risk profile, we have already made a video on risk profiling. The link will be in the description box. For long-term wealth creation, one should definitely invest into equity mutual funds by way of SIPs. And in this video, we'll talk about top 3 mutual funds where you can start your SIP. Specifically, I'll talk about 3, wherein one in each category, that is 1 large cap fund, 1 mid cap fund and 1 small cap fund. If you are a conservative investor, you should go for a large cap fund. And if you are a moderate investor, then you should go for a mid cap fund. And for investors who are very aggressive, they can definitely opt for a small cap fund to meet their long-term goals. So now let's start. So the first fund that we'll talk about is Axis Blue Chip Fund. Now this fund is under large cap category. I'll tell you the basics of the fund first. So it was launched on 5th Jan 2010. The AUM of this fund is 27,142 crores and the expense ratio is 1.77%, which is reasonable for a fund in large cap category. Now let us see the most important thing, that is the returns generated by this fund. Now when we look at the returns, we should be comparing it with the benchmark as well as the category and also the peers. Now let us see the returns now. We will see the returns for 3-year time period, 5-year time period, 7-year time period and 10-year time period. So this fund has given a return of 15.63% in 3 years, 16.35% in 5 years, 13.41% in 7 years and 14.33% in 10 years. Now we should always compare this with the benchmark and category. So if I see the benchmark returns in these time periods, it was 15.04%, 15%, 12.17% and 12.47% respectively. Similarly, if I talk about the large cap category, the returns that this category has given is 13.92%, 13.97%, 11.52% and 11.82%. Now you can clearly see from this table that this particular fund has outperformed the benchmark as well as the category. Even if I compare this fund with other large cap funds, this has outperformed them in the long term. Returns are not the only criteria that we should be looking at while selecting a mutual fund. But on the other hand, we should also look at the risk component of it. As we can see, there are multiple funds which give really high returns, but at the same time the risk component is also very high. To assess the risk of this fund, we should be looking at few things. The first one is standard deviation. Now standard deviation of this fund is 18.35. Now if I compare it with the benchmark, the standard deviation is 22.06. So compared to the benchmark, it is lower, and always standard deviation should be lower. So lower the better. So this is a good fund if we talk about just the standard deviation. Now the second thing that we should be looking at is Sharpe ratio. Now Sharpe ratio is basically tells you that the amount of risk that you are taking for a fund, are you getting the returns as per the risk that you are taking or not. So here in this case, Sharpe ratio is 0.66 and the Sharpe ratio of benchmark is 0.55. So it is higher than the benchmark, which is again good because Sharpe ratio is always higher the better, which means you are taking a lower risk and you are getting a higher return. So it's always better that you opt for a fund which has a higher Sharpe ratio. Another important thing that we should be looking at is beta. Now beta basically tells you the volatility of the fund. Now if I talk about the benchmark beta is always 1. Now compared to the benchmark, what is the volatility in this fund? So in this fund the beta is 0.79, which is also really nice because as compared to the market or the benchmark, this particular fund has lower volatility. The next what we look at is alpha. Now let's first understand what alpha is. So basically every mutual fund for a given level of risk that it takes is expected to generate a certain level of return, which we call it as expected return. And if the fund is able to beat that expected return and generate more than that, we call it as the fund is giving a positive alpha. So for in this particular fund, Axis Blue Chip Fund, the alpha is 2.47. So a positive alpha of 2.47 is really nice. So definitely if we look at the risk part of this fund, it is well managed and definitely it's a good investment to make for your long-term goals. I would definitely recommend this fund if you have a goal which is 3 or more years later. The second fund we'll now discuss in the mid-cap category, and the fund name is Kotak Emerging Equity Fund. Now the basics of this fund. So this fund was launched on 30th March 2007 and the AUM is 12,463 crores. The expense ratio of this fund is 1.82%, which is one of the lowest as compared to other funds in this category. Now let us see the returns part of it. Now this fund has given a return of 17.6% in 5 years, 19.46% in 7 years and 19.35% in 10 years time period. Now when I compare it with the benchmark and category, the returns are 18.05%, 18.03% and 16.22% for the benchmark. And in the mid-cap category, the returns are 15.38%, 15.76% and 17.18%. Now as you can see in this table, in the 5 years time period, the fund has underperformed the benchmark by 1%, but it has outperformed the category. But when we talk about 7 years and 10 years time period, this fund has outperformed both the benchmark and the category. It is on top based on 7 years and 10 years return category. Now let us see how much risk is involved in this fund. So now to check the risk part, like I said, we'll see few parameters. The first one is standard deviation. So standard deviation of this fund is 25.49. Like I said, lower the better, and it is lower than its benchmark, which is at 26.79. The other thing is Sharpe ratio, again higher the better, and here it is 0.68 compared to the benchmark, which is 0.59. So again it is higher, so it's better. Now comparing about the beta of this fund is 0.94. Anything less than 1 means it is less volatile than the benchmark, which is again good. And alpha of this fund is 2.56, which is again good as it is giving more than the expectations. I recommend this fund if you want to invest for 5 to 10 years time period. Now coming to the last and the third fund, which is under small cap category, is SBI Small Cap Fund. Now this fund was launched in the year 2009 and the AUM of this fund is 8,664 crores. The expense ratio is 1.97%, which is reasonable in the category of small cap funds. Now we'll talk about the returns. Now as this is a small cap category fund, we will see the returns for 5-year time period, 7 years and 10 years, because one should ideally invest into small cap category for a longer time horizon. Now again, as you can see in the table, the returns generated on this fund is 22.1% for 5 years, 24.28% for 7 years, 23.06% for 10 years. Now if I look at the benchmark returns, it is 14.79%, 11.83% and 10.73% respectively. If I talk about equity small cap category, now the returns are 16.75% in 5 years term, 17.27% in 7 years and 17.61% in 10 years. Now you can clearly see from this table that this fund has outperformed both the benchmark and the category, and the margin is also huge. Now if I talk about the category here, this fund has exceeded the category returns by around 5 to 7%. And if I talk about the benchmark, this fund has exceeded the benchmark returns by 7 to 12%, which is remarkable. If we compare the returns of this fund with other small cap funds, then this fund has outperformed in the long term. You might be thinking that the returns are so good in this fund, then the risk component will also be very high, right? So let us see the risk part of this fund. Again, those 4 parameters. Standard deviation of this fund is 25.28, which is lower in comparison to the benchmark standard deviation, which is 31.32. Sharpe ratio of this fund is 0.75, which is higher than the benchmark Sharpe ratio, which is just 0.46, again a plus point. If I talk about beta, it is 0.79, lower than 1, which means it is less volatile than the benchmark. And alpha of this fund is 7.5, which means it has exceeded the expected returns of this fund by 7.5%, which is really nice. So even if you compare the risk part of this is a very well managed fund. Currently, small cap category has given huge returns in the past 1 year, and it is also very volatile. So I would not recommend that you put any lump sum amount under small cap category funds. I would suggest to definitely go for SIPs, and I further recommend this fund if you have an investment horizon of 7 years or more. So these were the top 3 mutual funds where you can start your SIPs to meet your long-term goals. Now to start your SIP, I would like to just share what is the minimum investment that you can do in these funds. For Axis Blue Chip Fund, the minimum SIP that you can start is 500 rupees. For Kotak Emerging Equity Fund, the minimum SIP is 1000 rupees. And for SBI Small Cap Fund, the minimum SIP is again 500 rupees. So based on your goal requirements, you can start an SIP in any one or all these 3 funds. This was all about your long-term goals. But in case you have any short-term goal, you can definitely go to our website Fintoo Invest, where you can explore different funds, compare, and then select one for yourself. For any further query, feel free to get in touch with our finance experts. I hope this video was helpful, and for more such investment recommendations, do subscribe to our channel.